tonight, Albanese's Ministry of Truth, yet more reforms to crack down on so-called misinformation, and its tent city as the homelessness crisis in Queensland worsens. But Premier Stephen Miles is doing nothing. I'm also going to look at the new entrants on the rich list. Editor John Stensholt will join me tonight ahead of the release of Australia's richest 250 people tomorrow. But first tonight, how Anthony Albanese and Penny Wong are cozying up to China at the expense of our national security. TikTok today is just the latest example. The Prime Minister appears unconcerned about TikTok's security threats, despite the fact both Democrats and Republicans are cracking down on the Chinese-owned app in the United States. The House voted overwhelmingly to pass a law that would ban TikTok from operating in the US or force a sale. Now, TikTok has been criticised for how its algorithm selects content for viewers. It steers dangerous content to young people. It's also taken a very aggressive pro-Hamas position on Israel's war on terror. And given TikTok is owned by a Chinese parent company, and this is by far the most popular app with young people globally, this is giving a foreign power unprecedented control to influence public opinion and interfere with social cohesion. There are also concerns around the personal user data that China can collect from TikTok users. Well, Republican Congressman Mike Gallagher, who we've had on this show many times before, he says it's too dangerous for TikTok to continue to operate in the US.
It isn't just a way for ByteDance to make money. It's a means of influencing foreign societies. Xi Jinping has specifically talked about the power of short-form videos to propagate pro-CCP narratives and influence foreign societies. That is the heart of the concern. There's a separate concern about the app's ability to track your location, spy on you, but really I think the core concern is the opacity around the algorithm and the way in which it can manipulate certain information.
The Director of National Intelligence in the United States, Avril Haines, said today that she can't rule out the possibility that China will use TikTok to influence the 2024 elections. And our own spy boss, ASIO Chief Mike Burgess, has warned just recently that foreign interference is the top threat we're facing.
Director Haines, you cannot rule out that the CCP could, again, just like they did here, use TikTok as a platform to influence 2024 elections, right?
We cannot rule out that the CCP could use it, correct?
Security agencies such as ASIO face a potential deadly dilemma. The threat environment demands we dedicate more resources to countering espionage and foreign interference.
And yet, despite the clear intelligence concerns, Albanese seemed untroubled today.
We're independent. We don't follow other countries. What we do is we make decisions based on our security assessments. Our security assessments means that on phones that have sensitive material, such as government's phones, we do not have TikTok.
But Peter Dutton and Shadow Home Affairs Minister James Paterson argued today that we do need equivalent legislation to the United States.
So for the same reason that the House of Representatives has now taken action, the Australian government must take action. This has been clear for some time now, but there should be no further excuses for the inaction of the Albanese government. They should have already sent drafting instructions to the Department of Home Affairs to get them to prepare equivalent legislation for Australia.
I think the Prime Minister, particularly at a time like this, doesn't need to be weak. He needs to be strong and to show the leadership that's required to keep Australian kids safe online.
But the reality is that the Albanese government has stopped publicly criticising the Chinese government. There's basically no criticism of foreign interference, cyber attacks, or human rights abuses. It's been around 18 months since Penny Wong uttered a word about human rights abuses in Xinjiang, where Muslim Uyghurs are in concentration camps. Yet she happily criticises Israel every single day simply for defending itself from terrorists. The ASIO boss is the only official who's dared to speak publicly about Chinese aggression. This approach is winning us brownie points in Beijing, and China is now lifting wine tariffs, and its Foreign Minister Wang Yi is meeting with Penny Wong next week. But James Patterson told me today that our silence is the main price we've paid for these concessions. But it could be even worse than that. You'll recall that China issued a list of 14 demands to Australia when Scott Morrison was in power. One of them was to shut down the think tank ASPI. That's the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. It receives funding from the US. Well, guess what the Albanese government has done? It's announced a review of ASPI, and it's being conducted by Peter Varghese, who says it's not in our interest to thwart China's rise. So it looks like Albo and co could just cave into one of China's demands. This is all extremely worrying. It's one thing to resume normal diplomatic relations with China, but it's entirely another to be silent in the face of aggression and to ignore clear security concerns as expressed by Five Eyes intelligence chiefs just to appease Beijing. What we are seeing is that Anthony Albanese and Penny Wong are putting the China relationship above national security. Now, Labor insider Cameron Milner, who'll be on my show in a moment tonight, he says there's a pattern of capitulation to China from the Albanese government that should be deeply worrying. He says in a piece titled ALP is China's Lapdog that China will see a prime minister grinning to gratuitous compliments while avoiding raising matters of genuine national interest. He says Australia needs to have a proper conversation about how we defend our values and our neighbours from foreign aggression. He says defunding ASPI might keep you sweet with the Chinese. It doesn't help our national interest. And as for Penny Wong, well, Cameron Milner says that it's beyond ironic that Wong fights to re-establish funding to UNRWA, which employed terrorist killers and supplied free electricity to their communications centre. At the same time, she wants to cut funding to ASPI. Well, between Wong and Albanese, this is the worst foreign policy duo we've had in office in recent political history. Our country is in a more fractious state than before they took charge. Social cohesion is breaking down. Racism is rampant. Jewish women feel unsafe, and foreign interference is rampant. Yet Beijing has the red carpet rolled out, with dictator Xi Jinping grinning as a think tank that irritated him now faces an uncertain future. There's little more important than our safety, security, and sovereignty. And yet these Labor lefties, for all their arrogance, are foreign policy duds, and they're risking it all. Well, let's bring in the man himself, Cameron Milner, former Chief of Staff to Bill Shorten and current GXO Strategies Director, also National Senator Matt Canavan. Welcome to you both. Cameron, I should mention you're in London. Now, you accuse Labor of being China's lapdog. How worried are you about this foreign policy approach from these two absolutely hopeless ministers, Albanese and Penny Wong?
And I'd add Richard Marles to it as well, because I don't think Marles is doing enough on AUKUS. I mean, he's playing rounds of golf rather than getting the deal done. So AUKUS is a worry, but so is our foreign affairs approach with China. Our near-Pacific neighbours are having China's soft diplomacy and hard cash buying access. And our solution is Pat Conroy sculling Carver and Albanese twerking in a Hawaiian shirt. That's not foreign policy. Wong is weak on China, and that's a real worry. And her defunding ASPI would only add to the Beijing tick list, the to-do list. Paul Keating and Xi Jinping would be very happy when Albo and Wong do one of the 14 items on that list. And the review is there to defund ASPI. Let's call it as it is. That's the real worry, that we're trying to denude ourselves of the skill set we need to defend our nation.
Matt Canavan, you follow US politics and Chinese foreign interference very closely. Do you think the Albanese government is taking too soft an approach towards China? The example today of TikTok, just the latest one.
Well, look, I do think the Albanese government have boxed themselves into a corner of China's making here. They've hitched so much of their foreign policy success, their publicly success or claims of success in foreign policy, to China's actions. So if China were to ever reimpose tariffs on wine, for example, or they've still got them or they keep them there, impose tariffs on beef again, on wheat, on barley, that would be really embarrassing for the Albanese government because they've made such a big deal of spruiking the changes since they got elected. And I just think that's a really poor way to put yourself in, strategic position to put yourself in, because China knows now. China knows that they've got the Labor government over a barrel and will be able to get away with more than usual. I mean, look, on the particular legislation that's gone through the US Congress, I mean, I don't have a lot of faith in the US Congress, I'm sorry, and I wouldn't be slavishly adopting whatever goes through that sausage factory. I've had a quick look at what they're doing, and their bill does not really focus on TikTok. It actually gives the president unfathomable powers to declare any person a national security threat, a foreigner a national security threat, and force them to divest assets. So look, I agree with the Prime Minister here. We're an independent country, we're a sovereign nation, and I'm not just going to take marching orders from whatever comes out of the US Congress.
It's not taking marching orders, but I've got Robert Potter, who's a cybersecurity expert, on my show a bit later, and he's going to take us through the very real concerns about TikTok, because he's been leading the world in doing a lot of work actually analysing where the user data goes.
Deal with that.
And
deal with that issue.
And how it's used.
The provisions of the bill I've seen don't even mention TikTok. And so this gives powers potentially for the government to regulate X or Truth or any of these other platforms. So I think we've got to be a bit careful here, giving so much power to executive authority. We need to protect free speech.
Look, just before we move off this topic, Cameron, just to go back to Anthony Albanese and Penny Wong, they think they're foreign policy geniuses because China's lifting trade tariffs, but all they've done is be silent in the face of Chinese aggression. And the most obvious example of that is when our Navy divers came under that sonar attack. Albanese saw the President, Xi said nothing.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. And he went on to get a handsome boy, gratuitous compliment, and smiled and grinned his way through that. No, look, the Labor government in Australia is not doing enough on national security and is certainly not standing up to China. And that's a genuine concern for all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's have a look at these electric trucks that were announced today. The government pushing their climate agenda by announcing that a fleet of electric trucks will hit Western Sydney. Here was Anthony Albanese thanking his mate, Chris Bowen.
My mate, Chris Bowen, a local MP here, and the Minister for Climate Change and Energy, who's doing such an extraordinary job in taking Australia to where we need to go. Because this is a transformation that will be good for our environment, but also good for our national economy as well.
Don't you wish, Matt, that you had people in these jobs who were actually good at their jobs instead of just being Labor mates?
Look, it's just one PR stunt after another. Meanwhile, you're paying a fortune for your energy bills, your grocery bills are going up, mortgages are becoming unaffordable for people, and the government continues to be addicted to these ridiculous PR shoots based on a few new trucks. I mean, great. Look, I've got nothing against electric cars. These are coal-fired power trucks that have been installed now in Western Sydney. They'll probably be charged overnight tonight, and usually New South Wales gets about 80% of its power from fossil fuels overnight. So great, that's fantastic. But meanwhile, I'm up here in the Pilbara, the thing that is driving our nation, funding our public services through the iron ore industry, and they're all using diesel trucks. We're just out at the Mount Tom Price mine yesterday. They're all using copious amounts of diesel. So why wouldn't we as a country, if we're a serious country, focusing on improving our oil security needs? We now import more than half our petroleum needs from overseas. There is 1.8 trillion barrels of oil, according to Geoscience Australia, here in and around the Pilbara. Why don't we look for that? And instead we're on these silly errands that just don't add up to much at all, while we do nothing to protect our national energy security.
Cameron, you say this whole announcement today is just a trick and these aren't even trucks as we understand them. What do you mean by that?
Well, this is the Albanese electric trick. These delivery vans, they're basically guaranteed to do 100 kilometres, up to 400 kilometres. These aren't long-haul trucks. These certainly aren't the mining trucks that Matt just spoke about either. So look, it's all about PR. It's all about a little announcement to make supposedly a big point. I'm sorry, this is, good for a company that had 45% of their fleet underwritten by the taxpayers of Australia. Good on them. But they're delivery trucks, they're delivery vans. And that's why I say this is an Albanese electric trick.
Yeah. Now, reports that Labor is planning to unveil reforms that would crack down on misleading campaign advertising. They've already announced new misinformation laws. This just seems like another version of it. I mean, Matt, of course, it's good in principle, but the question is who will actually decide which claims are misleading? Well, another government unit.
Oh, exactly right, Sharri. I mean, the Prime Minister is unfortunately continuing the nation's longest dummy spit since he lost the Voice referendum, lashing out and blaming misinformation. That some of his ministers claim that there's Donald Trump tactics here in Australia. I mean, why can't we just let Australians decide for themselves what's right or wrong? We have free speech in this country. It's served us well. Of course, the Labor Party have been pretty guilty of stretching the truth at different times at other elections, and you don't see the Liberal and National parties saying, well, let's just gag all our political opponents. We don't support that. Of course, we recognise what our job is then is to point out those lies and learn from the lessons of those election losses we had, rather than just simply try and silence average Australians. This is definitely not the approach to go down, and I hope it gets shot down in flames, just like the government's misinformation bill, which seems to be going nowhere.
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. We do have freedom of speech in this country. We're meant to have freedom of speech in this country. This is just another attempt to curb it. And, The Voice is a perfect example, Cameron, because Anthony Albanese, Linda Burney, all of the ministers kept coming out and accusing the no side of misinformation. So if they think that that was misinformation, well, and you had this unit running, well, a lot of their campaign material probably would have been taken down. As it was, a lot of posts were taken down by the tech giants anyway.
Oh, and look, the Albanese and Linda Burney Voice show failed because of no information. They didn't tell people what it was about. I mean, they failed at the first hurdle to actually explain why you'd have to vote yes. So no, it's not about misinformation. It was about no information from Albo and Linda during the Voice referendum.
Now, just very quickly, reports today that Palestinians who'd been given visas by the Albanese government had their visas cancelled while they were already en route to Australia. Matt, this is obviously would be very distressing for those families. But what it comes down to is the fact that these security checks should have been done properly in the first place. As we've been saying on Sky for months now, you can't turn around a visa in as little as an hour, which is what we showed the government's been doing.
Well, it confirms everything that Peter Dutton and the Liberal and National parties were concerned about a few months ago when this was announced. We said how are security checks at all going to be done here properly to meet our standards to keep, and our obligation to keep Australians safe. And clearly here this is shown to be a complete and utter schmozzle. These people should never have got on the plane, of course, and who knows now what they're going to have to do to fix this particular issue. My heart goes out for some of those people captured in this war. But we must keep Australian safety first. That is the top priority. And clearly the government has not done that here. They have failed to secure the safety of Australians once again after their other failures with the High Court case last year, the boat arriving not far from where I am today here in northern West Australia. Who's in charge of our borders right now? We need to have to think some new ministers, because the current ones are just not up to scratch.
Yeah, totally agree on all of that. I mean, Cameron, if you're issuing visas when you've got no proper consulate present on the ground in Gaza, you can't tell who are innocent families who deserve our help, and you can't tell who might actually be part of the Hamas terrorist group. You can't do these security checks in as little as 1 hour or 1 day. So this was always going to be a debacle when the government just suddenly issues 2,273 visas to Palestinians without the proper checks.
Oh, look, the whole immigration situation, the whole visa situation under Giles is a complete shambles, a complete mess. The only people seeming to get visas in Australia are assassins and pedophiles and slave traders. They get a visa, but poor people escaping the horrors of Hamas, are put through the ringer and put on a plane and then sent back. It's appalling. Giles is not doing his job, except if you're an appalling person like an assassin or a pedophile, because you get a visa then.
Such a mess. Cameron Milner coming to us from London, and Matt Canavan, so great to see you both. Thank you very much for your time. Now, coming up, we'll cross live to Washington, as I mentioned, for the latest on the TikTok ban. Plus, the richest people in Australia will tomorrow be named. I'm going to speak with the man behind the list about who's on it and who's not. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Well, the full list of Australia's richest 250 people will be published tomorrow in The Australian. Mining magnates still dominate the upper ranks of the list, but there are more and more women joining the list. Business journalist John Stensolt, editor, joined me a little earlier. John, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Well, which billionaires round out the top 10 of tomorrow's list?
Right, so Gina Rinehart's at number one, so $50 billion, which is an amazing number. Would you believe, Sharri, it's probably being a little bit conservative given how how the success of her Hancock prospecting has gone. Then you've got Nicola Forrest and Andrew Forrest at 2 and 3, so around about $37 billion between them. So there's a bit of a gap there. So Anthony Pratt and his family, about $27 billion. Harry Triguboff, about $26 billion in number 5. He's probably the only guy in that top 10 who does a domestic-only business. The two Atlassian founders are Mike Cannon-Brookes and Scott Farquhar, around about that $22 billion mark as well. Clive Palmer's around the $22 billion mark. Kerry Stokes, big drop down to $11 billion. And then you've got Melanie Perkins and Cliff Obrecht from Canva. So they round out the top 10, $10.92 billion, so almost $11 billion.
Interesting to see Nicola Forrest in that top 10. It's the first time, that's my understanding, that she's been in that list. Tell us how they worked out the combined wealth after their split.
Yeah, sure. So they have actually split. So what's it been? About 4 or 5 months now that since they've announced that they were separating. So they're still married. They hold all their wealth together, but it is now a 50-50 split, plus a little bit more for Nicola. She's got her own Fortescue shares. So look, otherwise they're keeping all their Tatarang, which is their private company, together at the moment. That's the company that owns Iron Williams and a whole bunch of agricultural things and other brands. But they're working together, but they're separate. That's basically what they're telling us in their wealth terms at the moment. It includes philanthropy as well. So look, let's see what happens over time, but that's how it is right now.
And John, what about some of the new faces in this year's Rich list?
Yeah, well, I think that's a really interesting part about it. There's a lot of new young names. So there's a couple of guys from the Gold Coast, High Smile, the toothpaste brand, so Alex Tomic and Nick Merkovic. They're worth about $600 million. There's a couple of there's some two ladies down in Tasmania who own Bluntstone, do you believe? A couple of sisters, they're 83, 77, Anne Routley. They are, would you believe, worth $600 million, and no one really knows about him.
Wow.
Brian White from Ray White as well. He's on the list for the first time. There's cryptocurrency magnates. There's all sorts of other different people as well.
I mean, you say cryptocurrency magnates, but hasn't crypto gone down in value massively over the past year?
It went down in value massively and it's come back up again. But the cryptocurrency guys that we've got on the list are about gambling. So they're the ones that, so Ed Craven and Tim Heath are two notable examples. Tim Heath's a new guy who's on the list. He's based in Estonia, but he's Australian, worth about $2.15 billion. But it's gambling. So he basically runs a gambling company, but the people that bet with him do it with crypto. Now, it's banned in Australia, so you can't do it here at the moment under government laws. There's lots of people around the world that can. So even though he's Australian, he's actually making his money overseas from it.
John, you work on this list for months. Can you tell us about some of your methodology? How accurate is the list? Do you have to rely on these billionaires to cooperate?
Well, a lot of them do actually on background, Sharri. I reckon, probably 4 out of 5, let's say 80% of them actually do engage with us and talk to us. Some of it's a cursory, thanks for letting us know, maybe a little bit of a no comment, but there's a lot that actually give us a lot of information. their sort of mentality is, well, if you're going to do it, you may as well get it right, at least in their minds. And look, changes in laws in recent years has made a lot of the private companies have to lodge their accounts with ASIC every year, and that certainly helps me out. But yeah, look, a lot of them will be reading it first thing tomorrow morning, I guarantee it. They might not necessarily like it, but they certainly tolerate it these days at the very least.
And are there more young entrepreneurs on the list this year than we've seen in previous years?
Yeah, there's certainly a changing dynamic in the list. There's more technology people or people using retail. There's more female entrepreneurs like the Zimmerman sisters, for example, the Zimmerman fashion brand, Tanya Roston with DeCuba as well. She's a recent arrival on the list in the last couple of years. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people on the list that, look, basically make their money around the world, but they live in Australia. So if you think about it, with the internet and technology, social media, they can build a brand here in Australia, but sell most of their wares or their goods overseas. And that's what's happened with a lot of these new companies like High Smiles and Canva. Now, Atlassian, obviously, that's been around for a little while, but those guys are still in their early 40s. I mean, so there's younger people than ever making more money than ever, and it's because of the rise in technology and globalisation through the internet.
Right, John Stensholt, thank you very much for joining us, and congratulations on doing such a thorough job. We look forward to seeing the full list tomorrow, seeing how the other half live.
Thanks, Sharri.
And you can pick up a copy of the full Rich 250 list in The Australian tomorrow. Now, let's return to the top story tonight, that the US Congress has overwhelmingly voted in favour of new legislation that would ban TikTok unless its parent company ByteDance sells it to non-Chinese owners within 6 months. Let's bring in now the co-founder of Internet 2.0, Robert Potter, who is a cybersecurity expert who has literally led the world in investigating TikTok and the security concerns behind it. Robert, thank you so much for joining us live from Washington. You're obviously there to speak to members of Congress and senators as well as this bill is going through. Can you just tell us, for those watching, TikTok, the most popular app with young people, what's actually wrong with it? What are the main concerns?
Well, the main concern in this bill is who owns it and what they can do with it. So TikTok's got a bit of a history of using the app to censor journalists and track journalists that it's interested in, that are writing stories about it that it doesn't like. It's got a history also of promoting China's influence on the application. And it's never been open about how it promotes content and which content it promotes. So, for example, we've seen that it's pushed a lot of pro-China narratives, as well as suppressing a lot of anti-China narratives. So you won't find a lot of open conversations about human rights in China on the platform. Now, Congress has taken issue with that because because of how big TikTok has become. It's now become a massive problem, given how a significant percentage of the American population gets its news from the platform. So because of that, it's now run foul of the Congress, and the Congress has set up a new mechanism to force TikTok to leave China or face a ban. One of the main issues there is because it's a Chinese-owned company, it's subject to China's national security legislation, which means it has to cooperate with China's espionage laws. And through this process, we've seen the investigation go through Congress, and a lot of people have come forward some pretty horrific stories about how the app is used and the degree to which the CCP has control over the platform, up to and including having a representative on the company's board. Now, the Americans are not going to live with that going forward. It's passed Congress with a really high percentage of the members voting in favour of it. It went through in a week. It's one of the fastest turnaround bills that I've ever seen. And it just reflects a consensus in America that something needs to be done about this ahead of the election.
And we'll come back to in a minute whether you think it's going to pass the Senate. But the two main concerns there are foreign interference from the Chinese Communist Party, also their collection of user data. I had National Senator Matt Canavan on my show a bit earlier, and he said that he's had a close look at the legislation and that it didn't mention TikTok at all, and also that it gives the US government the ability to use these laws to force any company to divest its ownership structure. Is that accurate?
No, that's not accurate. It does mention TikTok explicitly in the bill and in the notes that were given to the members of Congress. TikTok actually complained about that. They said it was specifically targeting them because they're mentioned in the bill. That was one of their complaints. The other thing is that it doesn't give any power to the United States president. the adversary countries that are in the bill are determined by Congress, and it's very difficult to get Congress to agree on just about anything in the United States. They can't even pass a budget. But there are 4 adversary states that are named. The countries are North Korea, China, Iran, and Russia. So it's very unlikely that any of this would ever end up applied to a US company because it's just not within the structure of the bill. Now, but it would apply to other applications like WeChat, which everyone who studies that app has similar concerns that they do towards TikTok.
Now, you've been speaking, as I mentioned, with US politicians. What are you predicting will happen when it does go to the Senate?
It seems to be the case that it will have the numbers to pass the Senate in the same way that it has the House of Representatives. The question is when a vote will be scheduled, and Shermer, the majority leader, has been waiting to see what happened in Congress. And everyone has been surprised in the last 24 hours just how fast this issue moved. The Republican Party voted almost unanimously in favour of the bill, in spite of the fact that their presidential nominee came out against it. So this is a fundamental change in the national security alignment of the Republican and Democratic parties on this. And it would be hard-pressed to see that momentum would be arrestable at this point because President Biden has already come out and said that he'll sign it.
Yeah, he has indeed. Just before you go, what do you think of the Prime Minister here, Anthony Albanese, today saying, oh, well, we're independent, we're not going to follow America, nothing to see here, a lot of young people like using the app?
I think that we clearly don't want to be moving first on this. I think we moved first on Huawei, and the Prime Minister probably a bit concerned about the sheer amount of retaliation we got from China on that. So I think we're definitely going to have to follow the Americans on this if they pass the law, because this is going to become basically an international norm. I think it would be really hard pressed for countries like Australia to continue to allow TikTok to operate in the United States after what we're going to see, which is going to happen in the next few months, as if this bill passes. It'll be massive legislative effort in the United States. It'll be a huge amount of campaigns through the courts. TikTok is going to take the Americans to basically every court that they can get. And the fight will be very public, and it's going to be very hard for Australia to stay out of this debate.
Yeah, all right. Look, I don't know if you actually want the credit for this, but a lot of what we know about the security concerns from TikTok is thanks to your research and your cybersecurity work at the back end. So this, is obviously a big outcome for you as well. Robert Potter, thank you for joining us. Now, coming up, it's tent city as the homelessness crisis in Queensland worsens, but the Premier doesn't want to know about it. And Chris Minns asks the feds for a fairer share of the GST pie, but Albanese claims he's got nothing to do with the GST. Is there an area of policy he's actually going to take responsibility for? Welcome back. Well, New South Wales Premier Chris Minns today demanded a fairer share of the GST pie for New South Wales. Now, this is a standard fight between the states and the federal government. It pops up the whole time. But here's what's weird about it. Today, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese claimed that the feds had nothing to do with the GST.
Well, the Commonwealth Grants Commission operates at arm's length from the government. It's not something that my government has direct involvement in.
What planet is he living on? Does he understand that he's the Prime Minister and that he absolutely has responsibility over the GST redistribution? Just ask John Howard, who introduced it. Well, joining me now, Sky News host Danica DiGiorgio and commentator Jason Morrison. Welcome to you both.
Hello.
Jason, how does he get away with statements like this?
Because he's not challenged by reporters who are around him at the time saying, sorry, mate, you're full of it. Look, the only thing he's right is technically he's right. That's the only thing he's right about, technically. But, it's like everything. It's like pretending you've got no say about how the grants are handed out because a committee makes that decision. Governments decide who sits on these committees, and if you've ever looked into who sits on the grants committee, you'll struggle, most people, to identify any of them. They're bureaucratic, academic-style types. The Grants Commission structure was put together 25 years ago. I mean, it's a dated structure. it keeps reviewing itself every 5 years, and it comes back
anyway. Scott Morrison redid the formula to give WA more money.
They sort of separately found a pot of money to give to them, but they can't screw with the formula because the formulas everyone agrees to. What they could do though, and this is where New South Wales rightly and Victoria rightly have a fair dose of the poos, is because they've given them 3 months' notice. In 3 months' time, you're going to get 6% less money from the federal government. No one can budget. I mean, these governments, all of them, operate so big on an operation with not enough money to fuel it already. They're borrowing to stay alive, and all of a sudden you're getting your money taken from underneath you in 3 months' time. That's the wrong bit.
Well, can I just say, as someone born and raised in Western Australia, I reported for many, many years in Western Australia. I feel like this issue comes up all the time. WA always crying foul over its share of the GST, and it happens all the time. But no, the Prime Minister cannot walk away from it because in the end, the federal government collects the funds that are distributed. So, walk away. Nothing to see here. It's all rubbish. It's all rubbish, but it's something that comes up all the time. It's very complex, GST distribution.
I'm with you with the WA thing, but when WA says, look, it's all right, we appreciate that we contribute a lot of money to Australia, but we don't want as much defence anymore for our...
But we get a lot of mining royalties as well. We get a lot of mining as well, so...
Anyway, let's have a look at Queensland's housing crisis becoming even more desperate. The Courier Mail reported today that now a tent city of homeless families has popped up in the heart of Brisbane's CBD. There are concerns now that Brisbane's going to get as bad as some parts of the US, like San Francisco. It was just last week that we heard reports of another makeshift community living behind a petrol station in Queensland Premier Stephen Miles' own electorate. Look, you'll all remember that the Prime Minister made cost of living a key part of his campaign pitch. Remember this?
A plan to address cost of living, take pressure off cost of living, pressure off the cost of living, cost of living relief, downward pressure on cost of living.
Danica, but the Prime Minister now doesn't take responsibility. And what is so sad about this is these are new homeless families. Their parents are actually both working full-time, in many cases, full-time jobs, but yet they can't afford to put a roof over their children's head.
And that is the tragedy out of all of this, Sharri. If you want to see what the face of the cost of living crisis in this country is right now, look no further than that tent city. When you've got mothers holding their children, their babies, they've got nowhere to live, they're lying on the side of a road in a tent, no clean, sterile facilities available to them. This is exactly what's going on right now, and there are no plans by no governments, Albanese, but also the Queensland government, to help fix this. There's a housing crisis across the country right now, but, we've got a case where you can keep saying promising cost of living, but you're not acting on it. And if you want to see who's struggling out there, look no further than this awful vision that we're seeing on our screens now. It's awful.
So sad.
It is.
Jason, it reminds us of this promise from 1990.
By 1990, no Australian child will be living in poverty.
So that 1987, we've still got Australian children living in poverty, and it's even worse. People who did live in homes now can't afford it.
And they want to pretend that this is a selective demonstration of it. The Channel 9 in Brisbane, a reporter called Peter Fegan, I've actually been following his stuff. He's been out doing stories on this since June of last year in Queensland, and some of them like metres away from ministerial offices in Queensland. And I would imagine that the premiers and the cabinet ministers, their security entourage makes sure that these people don't get anywhere near them. And, the farce of Albanese saying what he does about cost of living is that, to get to the airport, he's got to go past suburbs where this is a reality even in Sydney. And so you've got this farce that goes on where government has found a way to be able to separate itself from its realities by having, lines and lines of staff members between the public and them who just keep this crap away
What's
from
happening
them.
in Stephen Miles' own electorate?
Yep.
So surely he drives past this, he sees this every single day, and what is he going to do about it?
Or he chooses to look away because it's easier to do that and pretend it's a shock. And I would imagine tomorrow in his news conference he'll say how shocking these images are.
Yeah.
It's shocking, something's going to be done about it. But not much will, because that's the way they roll.
Well, the families who live there have revealed that they call his office, his staff, they never get a return for it. They don't want to know about it.
There was a lady, a 78-year-old woman living in a car, washing in the council dunnies, and she'd been doing it for months in Queensland. And the Queensland government, the local member went down and had a look at it, had a conversation with her, and because the woman swore at her, walked away, said, I'm not going to be abused, I'm not going to be... This is a woman who, you know, of that age, and you just think, how is it acceptable that that is your reaction to it?
They deserve better, and yet millions and 46 million sent to Gaza, to UNRWA, where their employees took part in October 7. Now, overnight, we learned more details of the allegations that Sam Kerr is facing. We learned that she spent time in custody after the alleged incident where it's claimed that she called a British police officer a white bastard. Danica, what do you think of all this extra detail we've learnt overnight, and has it changed your view on this?
Well, no, it hasn't changed my view on this. I still think that the UK police have handled this shockingly. Spends one night in custody, doesn't get charged until 12 months later. We don't find out about this until 12 months later. Regardless on whether you think that this was racist or whether it is not, as I've been saying for the last week, it just shows the sheer hypocrisy, the double standards out there. I maintain this. Sam Kerr has been a champion when it comes to raising attention, when it comes to racism. She's taken a stance in the Black Lives Matter protests. And in the end, if you are going to play the identity politics game, you've got to play by its rules. And she's been caught out. Again, if you think it's racist or not, it's up to you. But I just think it's all double standards.
Yeah. Look, it does seem overblown. You know, she is our national hero. She said something offensive to someone. Does she deserve to spend a night in jail because she said something offensive, whether it's racist or not? And of course it is. But seriously locked up for saying something offensive? We don't know the rest of the details.
I'd say she'd be locked up for being disrespectful towards police, and then the rest follow. I don't like the fact that we have laws that criminally go after people for things they say. If she says racist things, which that's the allegation she has, then, you know, I find it funny that you go to a football ground and watch her play, and if you dare to call out anything racist at her, you get kicked out of the ground or you get charged. We've created this sort of culture where all these things are now codified in law selectively, because the UK is a nation where there are people calling for those to be beheaded in the name of a religion on the streets. That's acceptable. That's allowable. For things to be said about Jews, that's apparently allowable both there and here. That gets turned a blind eye to, but we go after a celebrity footballer because she was half tanked and she said a stupid bloody thing to the
But I think we've
cops.
got to wait until the body cam vision comes out.
Yeah.
To be able to see what's allegedly actually occurred.
But there's no
here.
accusation of any physical assault.
No, there's
the
not.
only accusation is a verbal.
Is a verbal,
racial.
but I think it will probably maybe put things into more context when we actually can visually see.
Perhaps, but otherwise, at this moment, I agree with you, Jason. I mean, we've seen these massive protests over weeks and weeks and weeks on the streets of London, where people are saying, pro-Palestinian activists are saying the most aggressive, appalling, racist things, and they never get arrested ever. All right, Jason Morrison, Danica DiGiorgio, thank you both so much for joining me tonight. Now, after the break, we're going to cross live to Israel. Politician Sharon Haskell will join us. She's going to speak about how the relationship between Biden and Netanyahu is breaking down. What more? And plus, is Israel just weeks away from wiping out its enemy Hamas with a key leader killed today? Stay tuned. Welcome back. Well, Israel says it killed a significant Hamas leader, Hadi Mustafa, in a drone strike in Lebanon. And this comes as the relationship between Joe Biden and Benjamin Netanyahu is at its lowest point. Well, joining me now for her analysis is Israeli politician Sharon Haskell. Sharon, thank you so much for joining us once again. Look, what percentage...
Thank you, Sharri, for having me.
Israel says this is a big kill today, this Hamas leader. What percentage of Hamas terrorists has Israel managed to track down and kill so far? And do you expect you will be successful in eliminating the terror group?
So it really depends. I mean, it's very difficult to eliminate a terrorist organization because more from an organization, this is an idea. This idea of radical Islam that needs to rule the world, that needs to be forced on people and on community. And this is something that is very difficult to eliminate. But Hamas military wing, since we've started the operation and since the war started on 7th of October, we have quite a few achievements in front of Hamas military wing. And the drone elimination was, I think it was ranked number 3 in Hamas, one of its military wing. So it's extremely significant. Hamas is sort of estimated as 30,000 soldiers or troops or army militants or terrorists, any way you would call them. And there's different estimation. It is very difficult to give an accurate number, but we believe that there's at least 9,000 Hamas militant terrorists that were actually eliminated during this time of war.
That you've already killed so far since October 7. Sharon, look, the international pressure on Israel over civilian loss of life in Gaza is growing. No more so than from Joe Biden. The relationship between Biden and Netanyahu is definitely at its lowest point. What's your response to some of the criticism that we're seeing from the United States? And do you think Israel will or should change any of its military tactics?
So there's been quite a bit of tension, but I have to say that Netanyahu is right when he say that he's acting in the name of the Israeli people. If anything, from my position as a parliament member who naturally is in the opposition, but we've actually entered the coalition because of this war to back up this government on, to be honest, this is a truly independent war that we're actually fighting on our future, on our existence here in Israel. And if we have any criticism towards Netanyahu, is that he's actually stalling military operation and he's not advancing hard enough or fast enough in order to eliminate Hamas military wing. I mean, if you look on Rafah, we should have been there already 2 months ago. If we speak about the Philadelphia crossing, same thing. And so I think that the criticism about Netanyahu is actually the exact opposite. He is acting in the name of the Israeli people. We back him, even from the opposition, even though we had major differences in the last 3 years.
And are you worried about the United States relationship? Are you worried that the international community is starting to leave Israel more isolated?
So with our American relationship, I'm not worried about it because there's a very strong government-to-government relationship and also parliament to House of Representatives and Senate. But more so, our relationship is people to people, and the community, in all communities in America and communities here in Israel, are really in a very strong bond. And this is something that you cannot destroy. And it will be very, very difficult to sort of tie down. So in that sense, I'm not worried. But I can see different international pressure from different governments who are actually now switching position. For example, Canada. I mean, Canada has declared that they're going to send back funds to UNRWA. We know that Hamas is controlling UNRWA in Gaza. This is literally sending money to Hamas, to terrorists. They have their foreign minister actually yesterday, she spread literally blood libels that are being spread, conspiracy theories, and is actually now said that she will fund that as well. So there's quite a bit of tension, for example, with our friends in Canada. And it is similar with some of our friends in Europe.
You mentioned Canada. Well, Australia wants to resume funding to UNRWA as well. I'm going to send you some comments about what our Foreign Minister Penny Wong's had to say as well. Sharon, we're out of time. Thank you very much for joining me. I'll see you on Monday at 8 o'clock. Great to have your company this week. Here's Paul Murray.